I'm Pat Fish, and I'm a member of the Friends of the Page Walker and on the Preservation Committee, and we are the committee that sponsors these programs. And we welcome all of you for coming. We're excited tonight because we're beginning a brand new series for our Preservation Committee, and it's called Places of Faith. And these programs will explore the rich history of local congregations of all faiths in our community and the role in building the Cary community. And we felt it was only fitting that First United Methodist Church in Cary should be the very first one in the series, as this congregation holds the honor of being our town's first church. We are so pleased to welcome Timmons Player. He's a member of the church, and he's our speaker. He's lived in Cary since 2004, has 3 children, 2 of which are at home, and he told me tonight he has a daughter who is out of college and is working in Charlotte. He works as a software developer, but he has a fondness for history, and there's no doubt about that. He's been a member of the church for 11 years, and right now he describes himself as the de facto chairman of the First United Methodist Church Anniversary Book Committee. This group is putting together a book to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the church in 2021. And what's really significant about that is that the town will also be celebrating its 150th anniversary in 2021. And of course, the reason is Frank Page, the founder of the town of Cary, also built the first church. Because Timmons is working on this committee, he wanted me to share with all of you that if any of you have any interesting historical facts about the church, know any of those facts, and better yet, have any pictures of the church, please let him know. He would appreciate anyone sharing those items with him. Timmons?
All right, so I'm going to give you a rundown of the church over time. We'll be talking about the building itself. It's gone through a lot of changes over 150 years. I will talk about some of the things the church has done for extended periods of time in terms of serving the community. And we'll also talk about some of the more famous people, I guess, who are members of the church. Let's see. This is going to be kind of informal. If you have any questions, just stop me and ask away. There's also a bit of interactivity at the end, so hopefully this will be entertaining. So let's get started. All right. So the first thing is, I don't know how many people are familiar with early Methodism, but Methodists came over, were a branch of the Anglican Church started by John Wesley. John Wesley started his ministry in the U.S. in Savannah, Georgia, in the Georgia colony, and it spread out from there. By the 1800s, early 1800s, Methodist ministers had made it to the Raleigh area. And you can see that this is a map of Raleigh, or Wake County from 1870. It's hard to see probably from the back, but the important part on this map is this little dot right here, which is misspelled as Asbury, A-S-B-E-R-R-Y, when it should be Asbury, A-S-B-U-R-Y. But this spot was one of the first Methodist meeting houses in Wake County. And today, the only thing left of it is a cemetery, which is located here, and it's surrounded by, this is a PSNC's utility over here, storage over here. This intersection of Chapel and Trinity Road, which is just down the street. This congregation actually kind of died off in 1870 due to the growth of Cary and its Methodist congregation. Because they were so close, right? There's no reason to have them 2 churches or 2 congregations so close together, so they kind of merged. But anyway, so that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that Methodist ministers were really assigned lots of churches. Unless you had a really big church, you were basically given a whole bunch of churches to go preach to. And they would usually preach at a couple of churches every Sunday, and every Sunday they would go to different churches, right? It's called a circuit. This is one of the Cary ministers from during 1913 to 1917. His name is Mr. Robinson, and that is him on his way on his circuit. So obviously it was probably a very grueling existence, I would think, having to travel around on a horse and carry, horse and buggy. Anyway, so the Cary circuit consisted of these 9 locations, off and on. Obviously the Asbury one disappeared. Some of them got renamed, so you recognize their new name, Garner instead of Beulah. Holland's Church actually is somewhere around here, and they have a history book they printed recently. But anyway, there's the list. The other interesting fact to note is that Cary remained a circuit until 1941. So, that doesn't seem like that long ago to have traveling preachers. All right. So, how do we get to the Methodist Church in Cary? Well, all right. So, before we talk about that, one thing that's really nice is the Cary Church actually has the membership rolls for that circuit. And so this is actually a page from it, which you probably can't read in the back, but the earliest date on here is 1835 for a member of the church. Interestingly, there's a big gap. There's a bunch of 1853s and then 1870s sort of start here. But these books are really interesting because they list the people who joined, obviously, and when they joined, but they also list the reason why people were expelled. And they're pretty vague, but specific enough to know that there definitely was a little partying, I guess, going on here. There are lots of expelled for drunkenness, expelled for lack of tithing, expelled for playing cards. Anyway, and that brings us to 1871. Town of Cary is founded. I believe the date is April 3rd. So their 150th anniversary is coming up too. At the time, this guy was the preacher on the Cary circuit. His name is Raven. It says 1872 to 73. I don't know why it says that. He was also in 1871. So the way Methodist ministers were appointed is they would go to the conference, the church conference every year, and the church conference would say, all right, you're going to preach this circuit, you're going to preach this circuit. And there were one-year appointments, but sometimes they were renewed. So you could have the same guy in a circuit for a few years. What's interesting about Mr. Reagan is that he was responsible for building 13 churches in North Carolina. One of them is the Cary Church. This is the deed for that first plot of land that Cary was given. The original is handwritten. This is a typed up copy. Both the handwritten copy and the typed copy are in the Book of Records at the Wake County Records Office. But what's interesting about this is the plot of land that was given to the church was sold for $1 by Sabrina and Stebbins Warner, with the stipulation, I should say the date. The date was April 11th, 1871. So just 8 days after the town was founded, the church received this deed for $1, with the stipulation that it had to have a church on it, a functioning church on it, by December of 1872, and that the land could only be used as a church, and that if it was not a church, then the land had to go back to the heirs of the Warners. So, it's still a church. All right. So, I guess the other interesting thing is there was clearly a building built on this land by 1872. We don't actually know what that building looked like because there is no picture of it. Eventually, the Warners gave the church another deed for $1 that could only be used for a church. That is on Academy Street, which is where this church was built. It was built in the 1880s, so I guess they received the deed in 1880 and began construction. There's this nice little newspaper article blurb that says from Reverend B.B. Colbreth, who's this guy right here. We learned the Methodists of Cary are preparing to build a church in that place. Heretofore, the Academy Chapel has been used for services, which must have been what the first church was. Says they have some lumber, they're ready to go. They're very excited. Right, so let me use the church. So the building was dedicated in 1884. Obviously, got any pictures of that event? It would be nice. What's interesting is we have a tower bell, or a chapel, and in that chapel is a bell that came from Greensboro College. Greensboro College burned down in 1863, and apparently the bell was removed from the college. It survived the fire. It was removed from the college and stored in a farmer's barn, shed, someplace. And there's some debate about whether the farmer was allowed to dispense with the bell to the church or not. So the church still has the bell, but it gets
the
rung.
heirs coming after
Say
it
what?
or something? The heirs of the...
Of Greensboro College?
So who cast the bell?
I don't know. I've not actually seen the bell. It's up at the top and it's not easy to get to. I should go check it out.
So there's a famous place in London, the Whitechapel Foundry, that did the Liberty Bell and a lot of other church bells, Big Ben and stuff. So
Right.
I don't know if they ordered it from there or something. Might be interesting.
That would be interesting. Yes.
So was the 1871 land deed, was that in the same spot as that one?
So that is a very good question.
Say on that
The
other-
deeds are not clear as to what the land is because they talk about, they reference streets. So we know this was on Academy Street. And the other one, the other deed was somewhere off of College Street, which became Academy Street. But the deeds talk about the actual pins, but those pins are long gone, and we have no idea what they are, and there's no surveys we can find at this time to figure out what.
So the group of people as a church started as a community of church people in 1871, or whatever?
So they started, they built the first church congregational building, chapel place in 1871, 72. Yeah. But they had been meeting in the area before that.
Okay.
So that's why the Asbury place had disbanded by 1870 is because they were still, there was a large meet up here. They were meeting in the school building it was here at the time. And they would also, because the preacher traveled, they would alternate and hang out with the Baptists every other weekend, apparently. Anyway, right, so we still have the bell. Let's see.
My own question was, I was trying to figure out, how did they come up with it, that our church was formed in 1871 then?
Because the deed is dated 1871 for the
Just deed,
first.
not necessarily congregation.
Right, exactly. Right, so by 1922, the building was too small, and which is a recurring theme, the roof leaked. Apparently, if the roof leaks on the right people, things happen. All right, so this leads to our history of building. So in the 1920s, as I said, the roof was leaking. They added a totally new building to the church. So before it was just basically the steeple part, or the sanctuary, and there were a couple of rooms in the front. This building here gets added to the back. This is actually a remodel of the building. I don't have a picture from the 20s. But what's interesting is,
So 1880, the first part, the front part is from 1880?
yeah, the front part is from 1880. early 1880s. Right, so they had like classrooms, community room, kitchens, They also refurbished the original building. We'll get to this stuff later. That's interesting. If you see the church today, you see it's a very brick building with stained glass windows. The stained glass windows were added at this time. They date to the late 1920s. Most of them do. Some were added later as the church got renovated or whatnot, but most of these windows that we have are from the late 20s. And that's when the brick veneer was added on the outside, and they fixed the roof. For a little bit.
For a little bit.
Alright, so at this time, one of the documents we have, so we have a lot of documents of what's going on in the church, but one of the neatest ones we have is this one. This is obviously not the original, but this is by Mr. Curtis, who was the building chair committee in 1928. And he had this very prophetic passage, which I'll just read because some people are in the back. Might not see it. Already, our quarters are practically outgrown. This is the reward in part for our efforts, for when we stop building, the church will stagnate. Which, I mean, it's amazingly prophetic because as you will see over the next several slides, all this church has done has been build. So, alright. So the first thing they built was this log cabin, which I'm sure some people y'all have seen, right? I mean, it's been in town for a long time. What's interesting is, according to the documents we have, all of them say it was built by the WPA in 1933. Problem is, the WPA was not formed until 1935. So we do have this survey that was dated 1940, which places the log cabin here in relation to the church. So obviously it was before 1940, but when it was built, we don't know.
And what's WPA?
Oh, Works Progress Administration. FDR's attempt to put people to work during the Depression.
Oh, okay. And what was it for? What was that building for?
This building was our first attempt at adding some space to the church. It was originally it housed the young men's Bible class. It still supposedly houses the young men's Bible class, but no one there is young. All right. So youth have their own areas. So the logs for the cabin were donated by Mr. Curtis, who's, as I mentioned, was a building chair committee person, from his farm. Members of the church stripped the logs and moved them to the location where they're apparently assembled by another group who may or may not have been the WPA. I mean, it's really kind of frustrating, right? Because this sort of stuff gets passed on. Like this date got mentioned in one of these documents once, and then it just gets copied down through history, and no one was like, not sure how that, and there's no way to find out what it really was, so it's kind of frustrating, really.
Is that the only thing that meets there, or the only thing that?
It's sometimes used by Boy Scout meetings. We'll meet there. I'm not really sure. Do you know who else uses it?
So they used to do like they would have Saturday evening services there.
Yes.
So for quite a while, and then William loved preaching in there.
Yes.
He would preach in there frequently.
William is one of the pastors at the church.
William Green. He and then also they would do like the pet services there because they can get the pets in there and it's not going into the sanctuary. So just various different activities.
How many people can fit in it?
About 30 uncomfortable, well, 50 uncomfortably, 30 comfortably. So it's not huge, and it does have a smell.
I mean, yeah. What's also interesting is this cottage. So I'm sure you guys know now, this church is huge, right? It extends all the way down the block. This cottage has been moved 4 times to make way for new buildings. Yeah, no one wants to get rid of it.
That's unique.
Alright. Okay, so by the 50s, they needed more space. So we have this very nice photo right here of the members of the church breaking ground or laying the keystone for what would become the Merit Building, which is this building of the church, which technically, so it was added back, right, from where the church was. It is kind of still there. I mean, it's been like built around and refurbished many times, but that building is still, I guess, technically there. And they were attached, even though we call it the Merit Building, or they called it the Merit Building, it was attached to the church. Like the walls were joined, or next to each other, so it's still one building. But all right, my point stayed, yeah. So more classrooms, fellowship hall and kitchen, courtyard, and then they refurbished the sanctuary. And this, it doesn't show up like this on my screen, but oh well. You can see that this was what the sanctuary would look like in the late 50s, 60s, where the choir got to yell at each other across the way. Anyway. All right. So in the 60s, they added this building. They called it the Children's Education Building. It was totally separate from the church because there was a AT&T telephone building in between the existing building and this plot of land. Unfortunately, I do not have a picture of that building, but you can imagine, I mean, it's just like a big brick building with no windows, and it had, you know, the switch for the local town to route phone calls around. There was an understanding between the Bell Company and the church that the church was allowed to build a little walkway between the two buildings on the telephone property land. And that's in the deed record office. If you want to check it out. You can see this is actually a preliminary blueprint. This is obviously not what actually got built, but what's interesting is the cross motif remained, and that'll come up a few times too. So this was pretty much all classrooms, but it did house the first preschool that the church supported. All right. In the 70s, more renovations. Take the theme, there's a lot going on. All right. This is an actual blueprint, though, for what the renovations were. And it's really neat to go through and see because you can see exactly what they did. Remodeled the church, obviously. Remodeled the sanctuary, you can see it's a little different now. Yeah, more offices, bathrooms, so that's nice. They refreshed all the bathrooms. And then they added a janitor's closet, which apparently did not exist before this point. Strangely. It's weird what you find in old blueprints, right? And also this organ, which they had an organ apparently, but there was a special fund for purchasing this organ, and we still have the paperwork for it, which is kind of cool. And if you were to open, I should have brought it, but inside is a amazing collection of 70s technology with giant circuit elements all arranged. All right, so the 80s. This is an aerial view of the area in 1981. This sort of building right here is the telephone building, right? So the church kind of like built right up to it, but they couldn't go past it, obviously. And then this is the children's building right here. So in the 80s, they finally they basically were able to buy the telephone building because the building had moved. The AT&T moved their building to the new location, which is, I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, so the church bought the building, decided that, boy, it's a big empty shell and we should just knock it down. So that's what they did. And we have this nice picture here. This tourist says, after the demo, and during the 80s, they added the current fellowship hall in the kitchen. So if you've been in the church, the fellowship hall that's there is from this time. And interestingly, they broke ground on Easter Sunday, 1984. Let's see. In the 90s. All right. So at this point, the church starts to get what for me is its recognizable shape, I guess. Because they extended the brick quite a ways down the street. So if you're familiar with the church, the Templeton building, which has like a little courtyard in it, that got built during this time. They added the pipe organ in here. Let's just go with my bullet points. The big thing is they expanded the sanctuary. So originally, the sanctuary only had a center aisle and a bench on either side, sort of like kind of the layout of this room. At this point, this congregation decided that it wasn't big enough. So they knocked down the walls on the side of the church and effectively built wings out to the side. What they found when they knocked down the walls was the original wood from the 1870 building, because the brick had just been veneered. And so that wood was collected, and one of the members of the church used it to make crosses, which were given to confirmands when they completed the confirmation class. And so this is one of those crosses. It has a little placard that says 1871, which you should ignore because it is not 1871. It is 1881. But anyway, you can come take a look, and it's kind of neat, right? Because this is 140-year-old piece of wood that was part of the original church. Additionally, they knocked down a lot of brick when they were doing this, and so they collected the bricks. And this is one of those bricks from the 1920 era of renovation, which you can also see. I mean, it is really just very British. It's kind of neat to hold. And it also has a little placard that probably has the wrong date on it. Just ignore that. After the presentation, feel free to come and look at any of the stuff that you want to. Right. So expanded sanctuary, added pipe organ, Templeton building. Whoop.
Did Miss Templeton donate the land? Do you know?
I do not think she donated the land. The land for this building was owned by Roots, I think, and they donated the land for like $1, maybe $10. A lot. The church acquired a lot of pieces of land for $1 or $10. At least before the current. Before now. But I think I'm not entirely sure why I was deferred. That's a good question to figure out.
Yeah, she's got some history with the church.
Oh, she definitely does. We have
Yeah.
one of these. I don't think I had that on here, but we do have a history written by her as well.
Is that a picture of her? up there?
Yes, this is a picture of Miss Templeton right here.
She may have been like a Dorcas founder or something like that.
She also did a preschool, she was a preschool teacher for a very long time too.
So after that, there's not been, until recently, there have not been any building renovations. They've been adding on to the periphery of the church, I guess. So remember I mentioned that the church, the original church plot has to be a church, otherwise it goes back to the founders. So the church has basically decided that we're going to stay here or where they are. And so they're trying to buy up all the land around the building and use it to expand the campus. And so over the past decade, there have been some things, a columbarium, parking lot, a garden, which have added.
Where are those?
Yeah.
Oh, so the church would, in this diagram, the church would be right here. So this is the other side of Waldo Street.
Oh, okay.
And then columbarium.
Yeah, so the columbarium is this here. This is a picture from the garden here. There's a playground here. Yeah, but the church would be right there. All right, that brings us to today. which is our last building for now.
Probably can add more.
Probably. So you can go see this one. It's got a community center, classrooms. It has a bathroom with showers so that the church can host families overnight. There's just some like computer rendered diagrams of the building, but the refurbishing of the sanctuary for I don't know what time starts this week. And this time we're told they're going to fix the roof. All right. So, a history of service. So I'm just going to talk about three entities or three things the church has done for a very long time. One of those is Fair Booth. So I guess Fair Booth is kind of known. FUMC opened a Fair Booth tent, I guess, in 1916. This is actually a picture of the 1912 fair. I couldn't find a picture of the 1916 fair, but I'm pretty sure the 16 fair and the 12 fair would look pretty similar. So in 1916, some ladies of the church got together, opened the Fair Booth, and they raised $13. Which, I plugged that into the inflation calculator and it said it was only like $200 today. So I'm thinking, I mean, that still doesn't seem like a worthwhile endeavor maybe, but they used it to buy some carpet in the church at the time, which would have been that original white wood building. Today, all the proceeds from the Fair Booth are used for helping various nonprofits, sometimes in the area, sometimes not. But the church doesn't keep any of the money they raise from the Fair Booth today. It's all given away.
How much is raised now?
Typical Fair Booth nets are around 50,000.
How much?
50,000?
15.
50. 50.
Whoa. Wow.
I mean, it takes an army of volunteers.
Yeah.
It's,
A lot of hand biscuits.
Yeah, a lot of biscuits.
They ran out of hand biscuits on Saturday.
But they're making more, right?
120 volunteers every day.
Oh, how much? How many?
100 to 120. It takes 30 people just to staff it for like a 3-hour shift.
Optimal staff, wow.
Nice.
Yeah, it's huge. So we are also the oldest continuous vendor at the fair, which is kind of noteworthy, and it makes it like hard thing to stop doing.
What does it say, home of the?
Oh, so this says Cary United Methodist Church, home of the original ham biscuit.
Speaking of the fair,
Yes.
do you know anything about that little church that's over there by the village of yesteryear? That
I
I
do not.
heard supposedly was once in Cary as well.
I don't. That would be interesting.
Part of something.
It was supposed to have been the original Ephesus Baptist Church.
Alright.
I read that or heard that somewhere, but it doesn't say on the, when you're there, it doesn't acknowledge that, or maybe it does somewhere inside, I don't know. I haven't been associated with that.
So interestingly, food was originally prepared in the homes of church members and then brought to the fair. And they did that up into the 50s. Like we have written accounts of people talking about cutting up, slicing hams in their homes, which that was stopped, obviously. Would not pass health code today. All the food is now prepared on site, except for the stuff that's like frozen and brought in. But anyway, you still got time to go get your ham biscuit if you haven't yet. Even if they're in on a Saturday, they make more, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're all made from scratch too. So they're not, frozen, they're made that day, scratch biscuits.
Flour, lard, and water.
Pretty much.
All right.
We have a 95-year-old woman who's still making biscuits. Virginia Jones.
Yep.
She's probably injured.
She's amazing.
I have a
Yes.
picture of her and Kara. They did it on Saturday. That's when I went out to visit.
Oh,
Another sort of famous offshoot is Dorcas, or Christian Community in Action. This lady, Margaret Keller, was a member of FUMC. And she formed Christian Community in Action with some other ladies. And they started as a preschool or educational program preschool for needy children. They opened the thrift store in 1970. Oh, supported by multiple churches in the area. It's not just us, but she was an FUMC member. Anyway, and the thrift shop was opened in 1972, which was the first thrift shop in Cary, I'm told. Wait. Alright. And then the other thing we have is the Methodist Children's Center, which is a preschool and a daycare. The preschool was started in 1969. This building was built in 67 or 68, so pretty soon after they got their education building built, they started a preschool there. Daycare opened in 1973, and the person who collected a lot of this information has a quote that is unattributed, so I don't know if it's legit or not, but it was like, community preschool. But I have no idea who said that, but apparently that was in 1973, I don't know. Anyway, it's in its third building now, so it's definitely something that is an integral part of the church and is part of all of our expansion plans as well. Yeah. All right, so coming to the end, this is where it gets interactive. So I'm going to show some pictures. Everyone on the board was a member of FUMC, and my guess is that you'll probably know some of them. So we'll see how you go. One of them is a gimme, the very last one. So everyone should get that. All you have to do is read. But anyway, so.
Frank Page.
Yes. He was actually one of the trustees of the church when it was first built.
It's Frank Page.
Yep, Frank Page.
Who's Cary's friend?
Do you want to know that guy?
He also built this hotel.
Thomas.
No, not
Walker.
So what?
I don't know, Walker.
That is Robert Pleasance. He was a Wake County sheriff for a long time.
Right.
Well, this guy. Kind of looks like a gangster, right?
Yeah. Is he a circuit rider person?
No, he was not a circuit rider. This is a RO heater. Yeah. He was a land developer in Cary during the 40s and 50s. Oh, this guy.
Is that your email?
No. I'm gonna have to look at this. Because there's two I get mixed up. It is William Garvin.
Oh, this
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah. Has the operations center in town named for him?
Yes.
Alright. How about this? This is Garland Jones. He had a building in Raleigh named for him. He was a Wake County commissioner, I believe, for a long time. I believe it is Virginia Jones' dad. Alright. How about this guy?
Dr. Rob.
Nope. That is a Waldo Rood. He was an early mayor of Cary, or early mayor, early 1900s. Right.
Kate Rabbitoe.
Yes.
Page.
Yes, Frank Page's wife, very good. I had to look up her name, Catherine Frances Rabbitoe. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Alright, how about that?
Walter Hines Page.
Yes, Walter Hines Page. He is if you don't know, he was the ambassador to Great Britain during World War II in the U.S.
World War I.
World War I, right. Yes. My mistake. Alright,
Oh,
Dr. Templeton.
right, Dr. Templeton. He was a prohibitionist, if you did not know. ran on the prohibitionist ticket. I'm sure you know that guy.
Fred Bond. Oh, Fred Bond.
Right. Fred Bond. It's interesting going through old church documents and seeing his name on various ones.
And all the buildings that are named, or parks, or whatever.
Right. One of the ladies on our history committee always reminds us how well he can run a meeting. Usually a meeting I'm running, so I assume there's a tip there. It's Robert Heater. It's R.A. Heater's son. He's a Wake County Commissioner as well. Go ahead.
Oh, it's far from
Yarborough?
Yarborough.
Dr. Yarborough? Or wait, no, sorry, that's Waldo. My mistake. That's Dr. Waldo.
I don't know.
Bertie Daniel?
Is it? Is it?
Yes.
Is it really?
Is that
Oh my
Bertie's
gosh.
mother?
No, that's
That's Bertie Daniels.
That's Bertha.
yes, in the 1940s.
Oh, gosh.
She's so pretty.
All right, and we've seen her.
Yeah.
Templeton.
Templeton.
Yes.
All right, that's the one you're on. That's Dr. Yarborough.
Wait.
Where?
That guy right
All right.
Who's Dr. Yarborough? But who was he?
He was just an early town doctor. He has a
His daughter has a dedication.
in the church. There's a inside the church building, so there's some stained glass windows that are inside the building that you can't see from outside. That are over a doorway from the sanctuary to like the narthex welcoming area, and they were put there by him. I'm guessing for his daughter, who only lived about 10 years.
They don't have any relation to the Yarboroughs down the street, do they?
I do not know.
Yes, they do.
They do?
Yes.
I mean, I expect it. Have we seen her before?
Yarborough's first name, what's his first name?
Frank.
Frank, yeah, F.R. Yarborough. And that's Margaret Keller. And then, yeah, Bob Warner, who gathered a lot of this information, so definitely indebted to him for putting a lot of this together. And then the guinea.
Robert Goldberg.
Yes. Alright. And that is, that's it. Thank you. Alright, so yeah, ask any questions. Yeah, I think his hand was up first.
Well, you said, so it started originally as with a preacher traveling from place to place. At what point did Cary get its own preacher? Or are they still traveling today?
1941 was when Cary became a appointed destination for a preacher.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
How many members of your congregation?
There's attending members, a couple of years ago, it was like, it's close to 5,000, over 5,000 that are members. Now, attendees are different, so like, we have, it could go anywhere up to 6,000 for that because there's so many fluctuations. Actual
Yeah.
members on the books.
I meant to look at that. I've heard that it's one of the largest Methodist churches on,
We're the second largest, we're not the largest.
I said one of the largest.
Of where?
Yeah.
In the United States?
North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina.
The Methodist Children's Center, is that supported by other congregations or just our church?
That is just the First United Methodist Church.
And you branched out to the movie theater, right?
Yes.
Yes, so there are services held in the movie theater, 2 services every Sunday. And they're sort of contemporary, so there's like the sanctuary has the traditional service, the movie theater has more contemporary services, more folksy singing type stuff, and it's less formal. So.
So you just have services in those two spots, the sanctuary and the movie theater?
At
Yes.
the moment, yes.
They're adding another one on
Saturday
Saturday.
evening.
Oh, okay.
So are there different denominations of Methodists?
So no, well, this gets interesting question. Originally, there were during the early I don't remember the date, 40s or 50s. The church split over the issue of slavery. The Methodist Episcopal Church South, which is what Cary was one, was obviously the slave-free favoring one. And then there was Jack Poster this at home somewhere, but yes, there used to be multiple denominations. They've all formed into one, and that's why it's now the United Methodist Church.
So I attended a church on the North Shore of Chicago when I was a kid. It was called Trinity North Shore, but it's a Methodist Episcopal, or at least that's their background. And I would say you would know it because in the first Home Alone movie, that's where the
Yeah.
kid runs in. So it's a beautiful Gothic church.
Okay. Any other? Yes.
Well, hey, does that mean, is there another building plan coming? You gonna move that log cabin again?
We built around it.
But I mean, the log cabin is at the end of the street now, so. Yes.
I have just a very favorite memory of Waldo Rood. Back in the early 80s, this building had a roof problem, a major roof problem. And there were a group of us who were trying to raise money to put a tarp over it so that the building wouldn't collapse. And I was walking up Academy Street toward the Page Walker, and this guy driving Cadillac pulled over and said, are you involved with trying to raise money for the tarp? And I said, I am, sir. And he takes out his wallet and pulls out a $100 bill. I had never seen a $100 bill. And he gives it to me. He said, that's for the Page Walker. Yes.
Wow.
Do you know what year that was?
It happened in the early 80s.
Early 80s?
When did he die?
I don't know. My knowledge is kind of limited.
That's okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
Those men that, their last name was Heater,
Yes.
do they have any relationship to Heater Utilities?
Yeah, I think there is a relationship.
I think there is.
Yeah, I think there is.
See, that's back off of,
Yeah.
off of Griffiths back in there, and that little, and it's a nice, nice.
Right, I think it's the same family. I'm sure.